Welcome to Hiring Happy Humans, where we talk about all things HR with a variety of folks, from CEOs to community partners, sharing up-to-date trends, best practices, and our wild workplace stories. Each interview is designed to leave you with the knowledge to keep your sanity. I'm your host, Dawn Sipley of Sipley the Best. Thanks for joining in, and let's jump into this week's episode. Welcome back, everybody. Dawn Sipley here with Sipley the Best, and we are ready to hire some happy humans. So our guest today is Amir Ladan, who is the owner of Ladan Law Firm here in Orlando, Florida, and he is a criminal defense attorney. And I wanted to bring him on the show today to talk about criminal backgrounds. It's a bit of a taboo subject. A lot of employers don't understand the benefit and the liability of hiring someone with a criminal background. And a lot of job seekers really don't understand how to be a job seeker once they have this kind of in their file, their employee file per se. So welcome, Amir. I'm so glad you're able to join me here today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dawn. I'm happy to be with you.
Could you just share with me a little bit about your professional background, what brought you to owning your own law firm, and what even got you into this to begin with? Because I do a lot of employment law recruitment, and that family law and criminal law seem to be in a vertical all by themselves when it comes to the types of situations that you have with your clients.
Sure, absolutely. So out of law school, I was hired by the state attorney's office here in Orange and Osceola County to be an assistant state attorney. And so I really cut my teeth as a prosecutor and learned how to be a trial lawyer in and out of court every day, just kind of learning the trade and the craft and mastering kind of that process.
How many lawyers actually become trial lawyers? Because it's a small percentage, isn't it?
It is. I don't know what the actual percentage is. I wish that it was a mandatory kind of thing. You know, in medical school, doctors have to go through those residencies and whatnot. I really feel like it would be valuable for all lawyers to have to go through at least a year of that experience just to kind of understand that mindset, you know.
Okay. So how long have you had your firm?
Actually, last month, in May of 2022, we celebrated our 21st anniversary being, a law firm. I'm getting up there.
Did you hop right into it then? Because 21 years, you're a little long in the tooth there, sir. So you've been doing this for a minute.
I have. So the state attorney's office back in the day required a 3-year commitment. And as much as I loved being a prosecutor and I felt I was really good at it, it's a tough gig when you're trying to pay bills. And so I did my 3 years, and in short order, I opened up the firm. I had a law partner for about 12 years, but he's a judge and has been a judge for about 9 years now. So, yeah.
Okay, very good. So when folks come to you, what stages is a good point for them to give you a call? And what advice do you have to someone who has found themselves in a pickle with an arrest? At what point do they know that they should give you a call?
I wish they would call me immediately, because sometimes they don't, and it leads to us having to kind of clean up some messes. I have received phone calls as early as, "Hi, I'm on the side of the road. I've got a cop behind me. What do I do?" And we are able to provide information and help from that point forward. So there really is not a time that's too soon.
Okay.
The sooner the better, in my opinion.
Okay. What's the number one thing that you really feel that people mess up in those beginning stages? I follow one attorney, and he's got a colorful line that he says, and it's just always about, zipping the lip.
That is probably some of the best advice that people could adhere to. And the challenge is, I think it's normal as a kind of human thought to say, oh, well, if I'm cooperative or if I'm nice, I can, maybe talk my way out of it or explain my situation, and they'll know that, I'm a good person and it'll be better for me.
Okay.
And unfortunately,
that's not typically the case.
Very atypically the case. Yeah.
Very atypically.
Yeah.
Now, What types of charges do you work with? Do you work with all criminal charges, or do you stop at some point? Do you have an area of specialty inside of criminal law?
Sure. I mean, the benefit of 24 years of experience is I've got a pretty broad array of experience handling just about every kind of case. I don't do death penalty cases
Okay.
just by choice.
Mhm.
So if there was a death penalty issue, I wouldn't take it. That doesn't mean that I can't handle murder charges, because not all murder cases are death penalty.
Mhm.
So it runs the gamut. We handle everything from minor traffic citations that are non-criminal, all the way up to first-degree felonies in state and federal court. We handle juvenile offenses as well. So
Okay.
the limitations are typically ones based on our assessment of the client's case, the needs of the client, and whether we feel like we're an appropriate fit for that client
Okay.
versus the type of charge.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are the type of clients that you would pass down the road and say, yeah, you're not our ideal client?
It's probably more personality driven than a
Charge.
specific charge.
Okay.
All right. And so hiring a lawyer is a very personal decision.
Mhm.
We're not all cut the same, and we don't all approach things from the same way. And so it really needs to be a fit that works from both perspectives. And sometimes in the process of sitting down with somebody, we realize just through how they're communicating and expressing their views and their wants and whatnot, that we may just not be the right fit for that client. And
Mhm.
so in those situations, we would pass.
Yeah. Really matching the culture of your organization with the personality of the client, I'm sure, is very important, because at the end of the day, if you have full confidence in your attorney and their abilities, you might be disappointed in the final decision, but know that you were given the best representation possible. I think the worst case scenario is when you don't feel like you were well represented and you didn't get your chance in court, and and then you're kind of left with an unsavory taste in your mouth.
Absolutely true. I mean, we're very clear about communicating in every respect possible what we believe is, um, I don't know, the most transparent way, because sometimes people have their own understanding or expectation based on who knows what, the media, some show they watched, CSI Miami, I don't know what, and they think they know, what the law is, or
Oh,
what their case is about, and they know it better than most from a factual standpoint. But we don't go to undergraduate school and law school and litigate for nothing. Those experiences inform and educate us in a great many of ways. And so when we communicate what we see in a client's case,
mhm.
if they don't um, value our perception or understand our perception, it's our job to educate them. And if that educational process still falls on deaf ears, then often that means that's not the right client for us. I don't think that's a common problem. I don't want to
Okay.
overstate that.
Right.
It's more often than not, the clients that don't hire us because of a financial decision. We can't be everyone's attorney, and I'd love to be everyone's attorney, but we just can't be. We have a
Right.
finite amount of time, and I say we because
Yeah.
it's not just me here.
Now,
And
how large is your team, out of curiosity?
so we've got 3 lawyers, including myself, and then
Okay.
we've got 3 support staff supporting those lawyers. So it's a small boutique criminal defense firm.
Okay.
Um, but you're paying for time, and so clearly I can't be everyone's lawyer for that reason.
Right.
And there is a cost that comes with the level of expertise that we bring. So
Absolutely.
that typically that's really the self-selection part of our process, is not so much, I don't like you or you don't like me. It's a
Mhm.
financial decision.
Right. Right. Now, what do you consider best practices around someone's been arrested, they have a job?
Mhm.
What do they do with their employer? They're most likely going to spend the night in jail. Like, what are their next steps when it comes to their current employment? What do you advise around that?
That's really tough. There are so many variables. So some employers will have contracts with their employees that have specific requirements about notice and disclosure. And
Yes.
so what I always want to be careful of is I tell them, look, I'm not a labor and employment attorney, and I don't want to
Right.
give you bad advice.
Right.
but you need to look at whatever the terms of your employment agreement are, if you have one. And if you don't, then it's just a matter of trying to really run interference until you sort things out, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to lose your job because of an overnight stay in the jail. And so it's a matter of, communicating through a family member, a spouse, a friend, whoever you entrust, to reach out to the employer to say, Amir's not going to be in today.
Mhm.
He's calling in sick, and maybe do it via email or whatnot, but not
Right.
really get into the specifics,
Right.
and then get out and speak to your lawyer and begin to game plan what you're going to do.
Mhm.
And through that process, maybe devise a game plan for how you want to approach it. I think some employers are going to be a lot more understanding than others.
Yes.
And then the charges matter too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a big part of that equation.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, there's definitely discrimination amongst charges. There are some charges in our society that are just more taboo than
Right.
others, especially when there's victims, involved. Violent crimes, crimes against children, those are some of the most challenging charges to really overcome.
Right. You nailed it.
Now, if someone has a charge in their past and they're applying for jobs, do you typically give folks advice on how to approach that type of situation?
Absolutely. So in a lot of cases, what folks don't realize is, they had a case when they were in college or when they were younger years ago, and kind of out of sight, out of mind. Maybe they've had employment opportunities that overlooked it, and so it
Mhm.
wasn't really an issue. But maybe they've switched careers, or they've gone back to school and gotten a degree in a specific field that requires licensing, and all
Yes.
of a sudden they're like, oh shoot, I've got this thing from 15 years ago that I
Mhm.
kind of brain dumped. How's it going to impact me?
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of cases where you can seal the record, or
Oh,
expunge the record, um,
okay.
and that can be a starting off point.
Okay. Share with me the difference between sealed and expunged, because there's a huge misunderstanding between what those two things are.
Sure.
And also, before I forget to answer this question, I would love for you to go over um, there's guilty, non-guilty, and the third option, and what that third option really means when it comes to whether you are guilty or
Sure.
not guilty. So I'd love for
Sure.
you to cover those things.
Yeah, let me handle that first, actually.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
um, a lot of times people confuse how they enter a plea
Right.
with whether they were convicted, and
Right.
it's not one and the same. So
Exactly.
when you go before the court, the three plea options you have are guilty, which means I did it, I admit it; not guilty, which means I want a trial, prove it, right?
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
no contest, or nolo contendere in the old Latin.
Mhm.
That a plea of guilty and a plea of nolo contendere have the same effect, in that you're closing the case out. The only difference in a real sense is, by pleading guilty, you're giving up your right to appeal any decisions that may have happened, and your appellate rights have a very short period of time on them. But sometimes
Okay.
people think, well, I pled no contest, so I wasn't convicted. That's not true. That is
Preach.
not true. So the difference is really marginal in that scenario. All you're doing is resolving your case. What really, really matters is, when the judge pronounces the sentence, does she or he say, I adjudicate you guilty,
Hmm.
or I withhold formal adjudication? A withhold of adjudication in Florida is not a conviction, right?
Okay.
And so if they're applying for a job, or applying for housing, going back to school and filling out school applications or loan applications, and it asks, have you ever been convicted of a crime?
Right.
If you received a withhold of adjudication, you have not been convicted of a crime. If you were adjudicated guilty, you have been.
Why is there so much confusion around that? Because I've always understood this, and maybe it's just because I was a baby in HR and I kind of just grew up around it. But so many people think I pled no contest, that means I'm not guilty. And I'm like, no,
No.
like, it doesn't. Like, what leads to that? Is it public defenders giving bad language? Is it just a general societal misunderstanding? What do you think leads to the the misunderstanding of those phrases?
It's definitely a combination of things, but I think it all boils down to lack of information or education, right? And so it's our job as the attorney, and I'm not going to give a public defender a pass. A public defender has a bar license, they're an attorney. And I think there are a lot of them that are phenomenal. So I'm not bashing them. I'm just saying, if you have a lawyer, and that includes a public defender, they should be informing you of what these collateral consequences are and of what the long-term potential is. It's not our job just to close the case out.
Right.
You have to be forward thinking about what that means. And so it is our job to educate and inform. And if the client doesn't understand that, I think that begins with us. The court has some obligation to do that, but a judge is not your advocate. The judge is not your attorney, and they're not providing legal advice.
Right.
There are a lot of folks that resolve cases without lawyers. And I see that time and again. To your question, and why do they not understand that? Because if they're uncounseled, they haven't had the benefit of an explanation. What does this really mean to you? And so I've seen that quite a bit, where folks will come to us even for, to expunge their record. I had an example I use all the time. My first year out of the state attorney's office, first year in private practice, a woman comes to me. She had just graduated from nursing school, and this is 20 years ago. And she said, I just graduated from nursing school. I'm working on getting my nursing license. But when I was 19, I had a petty theft. I said, okay, let me take a look at it. So I looked it up, talked to her about it. She went to court by herself, did not have a lawyer at 19, didn't have the means, and just entered a plea to the charge. She said, I did it. I admitted it. I entered a plea. The judge adjudicated her guilty on her first offense.
Okay.
And that conviction of a petty theft when she was 19 prevented her from getting licensed as a nurse. Almost 20 years later. So now an uncounseled plea, which means without the benefit of a lawyer, can sometimes be reversed even many moons later, but that's really not what's supposed to happen, because there are timetables for everything. But there's definitely a benefit in having an attorney so that you understand what you're dealing with. And then, of course, once the case is resolved, we can talk a little bit about sealing and expunging, if you want me to jump into that.
Yes, please do.
Okay. So in Florida, and I'm only speaking about Florida because every state has its own kind of nuance of how they handle things, right? But here, if you're a first-time offender and you go through, let's say, a deferred prosecution agreement, sometimes called pretrial diversion or pretrial intervention, what you're doing is you're earning a dismissal of the case. And a lot of people think a dismissal equals a deletion of the record, and it doesn't. You've dismissed the case. That's phenomenal. That's what you want, the dismissal, but it's still on your record. So if someone runs your background, it's still there. An expungement is the legal deletion of that record.
Okay.
So in order to have a case expunged, A, it has to be dismissed, and B, you cannot have any conviction of any kind on your record from another case. So sometimes people will have a case that gets dismissed either through diversion or other means, case is dismissed, but years ago they got convicted for some petty nonsense, whatever, disorderly intoxication when they were in college or whatever. That prior conviction excludes you from getting the charge that you got dismissed.
Interesting. So you got to be a one-timer to get that privilege,
or a one-timer in the sense of not having a conviction of any kind. And so you can have multiple cases that were resolved. If you received a withhold of adjudication on a prior, you're okay. And then you have to look at the nature of the charges too. So there's a couple, 2-3 step process, but it's really not overly complex. So that's an expungement is a deletion of the record. So that's the best case scenario, right?
Right.
A sealing the record is exactly what it feels like. They literally take tape and they seal the file, or in this case, now that everything's digital, they digitally seal the file so that you can't access the information. You can't see what's in there without a court order saying, I allow you to penetrate this record. So it's not deleted. So if they do a background check, they're going to see that there's something there. They're just not going to know what.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, because I know, it's an area of a strong stigma. And so with that, there seems to be like this veil of silence and shame. And so people only go to like their best friend for advice rather than asking an attorney, and then they get bad advice and everything. And one thing that I've really seen happen a lot of times is if like a job ad says, conducts background checks, people who have an arrest on their record just won't even apply,
Right.
because they do background checks. And I just want to encourage people that that does not mean that they're unqualified. It just means that the employer wants to know. So if you want to take that next step, you can take one of two steps. One, you can ask what their background check policy is, and of course then they're going to know that you have something. Or two, you can kind of just move yourself through the process, because I can say, after working with hundreds of companies over the last 20 years, they often will say that they do background checks, but then they get all the warm and fuzzies and they go, nah, John's cool, we don't need to spend the money on that, and then they don't. And I really feel that it is a corporate responsibility of the organization to do background checks if that's something that they want to do and what they value. It is not compelled upon the job seeker to show up and confess.
Right. That's true.
Is that, do you share that same stance? You kind of just apply and keep your mouth shut, and if it's brought up, tell the truth. If it's not, just keep on marching.
100%. I mean, and I tell people all the time, tell the truth. Don't play hide the ball with it, because they don't want to think you're dishonest, right?
Right.
You don't want them thinking you're dishonest. But yes, I mean, it's every industry has its own kind of areas they scrutinize more closely. So if you're applying to be an Amazon delivery driver, and they see that you've got reckless driving in your history or a DUI, probably not great. But if you have a marijuana charge from when you were a kid, they probably don't care,
right.
And so every type of industry and job may have its own pockets of yes, acceptable, no, not acceptable. But I don't deselect, or remove yourself from that process. I don't think that makes a lot of sense, especially in a market like right now, when people are desperate for good employees. I think they're a lot more willing to overlook things in the past than they would be if employment was robust and they had tons of choices.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've seen lots of employers make two areas of concession in these recent months. I guess dare to say years at this point with COVID. We're June of 22. So education and criminal backgrounds are two areas which I love, because both of those screening criteria do discriminate against those of color more than those of a Caucasian background. So for me, being a big DE&I advocate, believing in diversity and second chances and knowing someone's story, not just necessarily their conviction, is really important. So not everyone gets the same opportunities as everyone else. And so really knowing the story behind those, doing the background check, knowing what you're working with, digging in a little bit deeper, but then of course, always following your threshold of what your employee handbook says, because what you can't do is have rules in the handbook and then kind of wiggle depending on how you feel about it. Really, as an HR department, you should be assessing, as you said, what convictions affect this job and what convictions do not. That marijuana charge as a teenager for, someone in the accounting department, those are two different things versus a DUI on an Amazon driver, right? How much does it really affect their ability to perform the job? How much dishonesty was there? How much forethought was there to the incident? I usually take DUIs with a grain of salt, because you weren't even sober when you made the decision. Right. Now, if you're on your third, you haven't, learned your lesson or something, but just the preemptive kind of what led up to it. I often will read arrest reports, see how the person interacted with the police department and stuff. Did they Did they act professionally and with honor and integrity? You might be upset, of course, it's probably the worst day of your life. Or were you rude and combative and
Sure.
things like that? So just kind of digging a little bit deeper and while still holding those standards,
Absolutely.
I think the old, well, no arrests ever for all of time. It's an antiquated model, especially in the world that we live in. And I love my men in blue, absolutely. But sometimes poor decisions are made and arrests are made that aren't necessarily, legit or called for, and it really affects people's entire life, and you can't make hiring decisions for most situations just based on arrest. They do need to be made based on conviction. That's
Right.
our whole constitutional protections against being, innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
So I
You're
really
speaking my
caution those
language.
who try to screen out arrests and not just convictions. There's very few circumstances where that's allowed, like you said, with licensing involved or things like that.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a huge difference in the threshold required.
Oh,
Probable cause to make an arrest is a super low threshold.
exactly.
And law enforcement officers, do make mistakes. There's
Mhm.
also sometimes a shift in public perception, like we've seen over the last few years with marijuana laws. And so there are, things that do affect, I think, the perception of what's important or what's of consequence.
Right.
So there's definitely that. I do want to mention too, real quick,
Uh-huh.
one thing that we've seen. I'm not an expert in this, but I know it's a good thing to talk about or at least touch on.
Mhm.
Is everything's digital now, right? And so even if you have a first time offense and it gets dismissed and we get it expunged, it doesn't mean that every possible comment or record of it gets deleted. We don't do
Mugshot.
that. Right. So you've got these mugshot companies that are, to me, kind of like vultures in the sense that, I'll get a person's case deleted through an expungement, and then they have to go back to every entity that is out there to potentially say, take this stuff down. You don't have a right
Right.
to it anymore under,
Right.
Florida's, sunshine laws. And that's a real hassle. And so there's
It
companies out
is.
there that will do, reputation management. And
Yeah.
really what they're doing is kind of tamping down, right, all the garbage that's out there or all the
Mhm.
noise that's out there. Again, not my area, but I do think it's
Right.
worth commenting on.
Yeah. Do you know a reputable company that someone's in that circumstance and they want to get those images pulled down, or those news? Oh man, the news releases and
Yeah.
stuff, because the news can misreport things as well.
Oh, yeah.
How who would you recommend, if anyone, to work on that kind of stuff that's legitimate and does a good honest job at that's that social management side?
I haven't gotten into the
Yeah,
position
me
of
neither.
recommending anybody, not because there
Me
aren't
neither.
reputable folks.
Right.
The one thing I will say that I do not recommend is I do not recommend paying the
Oh,
entity that has your information to remove it.
so find a third party that goes out and scours and removes.
Correct. Because what
Okay.
happens is, and I'm not going to say a name of a company, but whatever company that has the mugshot up will
Mhm.
have a mechanism where you can reach out to them and pay one of their authorized, service providers slash attorneys to help you
Right.
remove it from their site.
Right.
That to me is one step removed from blackmail. And
Yeah.
a lot of these companies own more than one entity. So they realize, oh, you're willing to pay $350 to have your mugshot removed. Well, that's great because we've got it posted on 4 other sites that we also own.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
ridiculous. I think the law needs to be changed, but beyond that, my only advice is do not pay those entities directly. If you want reputation management, hire an expert that does reputation management based on whatever your criteria and needs are.
Very good. That's great information, because otherwise you'll go bankrupt going click by click by
Oh,
click.
it's
So
insane.
I'm,
Yeah.
yeah. What is just one piece of advice that you feel that that everybody should know?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. In my line of work, we offer free consultations.
Mhm.
Talk to a lawyer. Don't talk to law enforcement. Talk to a lawyer. And you can be pleasant about it. If a law enforcement officer is questioning you, tell them, I'd like to speak with you, but I need to have my lawyer present. And
Right.
don't compromise your situation, because officers are trained to
Yes, they are.
elicit information. And you might think you're helping yourself, and all you're really doing is giving up information
Yeah.
that's going to twist and use against you. So
Yeah.
the one point of advice, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, is do not speak to a law enforcement officer without the benefit of counsel.
Okay.
Just don't do it.
So if you were to go back and give young Amir advice as a professional, kind of growing up in this world of criminal justice and vindication, like what would you tell yourself 21 years ago when you just got into all this?
Well, I thought I was a reasonable prosecutor. I thought I was even keeled and treated people with dignity and respect, and I think I did. But you don't know what you don't know. Having seen this side of things from a defense lawyer, I can tell you that there are long-term effects of crime and punishment that we have in our system that people
Right.
don't fully appreciate. And so I think if I would say anything, it's understand how important empathy is in what you do. Empathy has to be a factor in how you approach people across the board. And I think that applies to me. It applies to the hiring decision maker in HR. It applies to the boss when something isn't quite right. And that doesn't mean throw out common sense and ignore red flags. It's not what
Right.
I'm saying. But you need to temper what you do with a little bit of empathy and understand, the human condition. I think that would be my one focus.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I think most people of logic, which is the vast majority of our society at any given time, would say that I think empathy goes a really long way. The number one reason people leave employers is not over money. It's over a lack of feeling appreciated or seen or heard. And that all boils down to empathy. If a hard decision has to be made and a termination has to be done, it has to be done with dignity and empathy and respect, just from one human to another. Because I just, I had to make a termination one time on the heels of a very severe arrest. And it was probably one of the most emotional terminations that I ever had, and also one of the most dangerous terminations that I ever had, because not only had this young man been arrested, but his marriage broke up due to the arrest. Custody was lost. So certain rights of his were lost. He also lost his place to live. And then consequently, a few weeks later, we attempted to work with him, which was not working out well. And it led to a termination. And so my level of empathy was so raw and thick during that time, because literally his entire world was falling down around him. And I've done many terminations. I consider myself good at having those hard conversations, but I think that one was one that I'll never forget, as many years that I live, just sitting with him in that moment and being there with him, but still having to provide those really hard consequences, because we had given the opportunity for him to deal with the things that he had to deal with, but it was just, at the end of the day, we did have a business to run, and the liability was becoming kind of too strong and whatnot. So you're right, you can't throw out common sense, and you have to put the business first and the safety of the employees as well, because certain crimes, violent crimes, crimes against children, again, workplace violence is a very real thing, and those types of conversations and protections and thoughts have to be put forward when and if you do have to make decisions towards termination around these types of circumstances.
Right.
So
Right. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I think you gave some great advice, some really good clarity. If anyone wants to reach out to you, if they end up in a situation or have a child in a situation, how can they reach you?
Well, we offer multiple ways to contact us, but I'm a big fan still of the old school phone call.
Go figure.
The Ladan Law Firm is located in Orlando, but we service people all over Florida. The number is 407-657-1555. You can find us on the web at ladanlaw.com and on Instagram and social media at Ladan Law as well. And like I said, our consults are free. It's a great opportunity to get to know each other, understand the legal issues, and see how we might be able to help. So,
all right.
we're here.
Awesome.
Here
Thank you so much, Amir.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks again for spending time with us today. If you want more HR stories and resources, go to simplythebest.com to join our newsletter. That's SIPLEY. Until next time, stay happy.